So my name is Daniel, and I decided to do this week's case study over Lothy versus the Joint School District Number 2 in the city of Cumberland. In 1965, Cumberland High School had their basketball team had made the state tournament, and the school decided to basically see how many fans and students and parents they could get to attend the game to support their basketball team for this accomplishment. They then got two 41 passenger buses and one 35 passenger bus from a charter company, and they headed off to the state championship game. While they were driving down Interstate 94, they struck. There was a multiple car accident, and one of the buses rear-ended the car of Mr. Lofi, who was a school teacher who was on the way to his game, or on the way to the state championship game with his wife and kids in the back seat. Mr. Lofi was killed in the accident 4 years later. After all of the legality stuff had been working its way through, the complaint was brought upon the school district, the charter company, and the insurers for a wrongful death suit. And the school felt like they shouldn't be liable because it was a charter company, a contracted out charter company, and by Wisconsin's state law, as long as they have certain school buses don't have to be provided for any type of transportation to extracurricular activities, which this was one. But if they were, they had to meet certain requirements, and one of those was insurance purposes. There was a minimum dollar amount that had to be insured for every person who was on the bus. There was a minimum dollar amount that had to be insured for damages, and as long as an outside transportation company met these standards or exceeded these standards, then the school was allowed to contract out for their services. The Wisconsin Northern Transportation Company was the transportation company that the Cumberland High School decided to go with to make this trip. The summary judgment on the first trial court declared that they were a common carrier, and so they did fit this mold that Wisconsin law had laid out for this school districts to contract out for common carrier transportation companies. Upon an appeal, the plaintiffs tried to say that the Wisconsin Transportation Company lost their role as a common carrier since the facilities that they were providing were not offered to the public, and the court dismissed that because there weren't extreme circumstances that were being withheld from the public here. The company and the school came to an agreement on a cost, and the school had all the students and parents and fans that wanted to go pay a certain part so they could afford these buses. Then there was the argument of the whole independent contractor, who is liable when something like this happens. And since the school contracted out to this company, should the school be held liable, or should the company be held liable? And an independent contractor is who assumes the most of the responsibility. The courts decided that since the school really didn't, take on any of the responsibilities. Yes, they had chaperones on the bus, but they weren't there to work on the bus, to drive the bus. They were just there to keep kids in order, make sure they got back on the bus. The only delegations or the only requirements that the school had placed on the bus company was that they pick them up at a certain time, they take a certain route, and they leave at a certain time and return home at a certain time. And since those were the only duties that the school had written down, the court didn't accept that that they were that it was an independent contract being signed when the school made this deal with the bus company. Both the trial court and appellate court agreed that the school did everything right within the laws of the legislator by contracting out this common carrier bus company, and the school wasn't held liable. The big implication that this has on athletic directors is, one, it's kind of an eye-opener to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row when you're getting charter buses. Where I went to school, we had charter buses for every single playoff game, regardless of the sport. And to now know how much has to go into just making sure they comply with the, just to make sure that their company's insurance has to comply with the minimum state requirement for school bus insurance. There's a lot to think about. Athletic directors have to make sure, and schools themselves have to make sure that they do their research to make sure that they are hiring appropriate outside transportation companies to take their kids in case something like this happens. That way they aren't held liable.